After the devastation and destruction caused by World War I, the world was so tired and fed up of war that it was willing to do pretty much anything to prevent another one from starting. So, when Nazi Germany annexed Austria in March 1938, the world did not react. When Nazi leader Adolf Hitler demanded an area of Czechoslovakia in September 1938, the world powers basically just handed it over to him. All he had to do was promise not to invade the rest of Czechoslovakia. Confident that these appeasements had prevented a war from occurring, the then British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain stated, "I believe it is peace in our time." Hitler, on the other hand, had different plans. Completely disregarding the treaty, Hitler was readying for war. In preparation for an attack on Poland, Nazi Germany made a deal with the Soviet Union on August 23, 1939, called the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. In exchange for land, the Soviet Union agreed to not attack Germany. Germany was now ready for war. So on the 1st of September 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Hitler sent 1,300 planes, more than 2,000 tanks, and 1.5 million well-trained ground troops. This did not look good for Poland, whose military was still using horses and old weapons. Some soldiers were even using lances. The odds were clearly not in their favour. On the 3rd of September, Great Britain and France both declared war on Germany. However, they could not ready troops and supplies fast enough to save Poland from defeat. The Soviets also invaded Poland on the 17th of September, per the pact they had with Germany, and on the 27th of the same month, Poland surrendered. Very little fighting happened for the next 6 months. Britain and France were basically just preparing their defences, and Germany were getting ready for a major invasion. The war was actually so quiet during this time that many journalists were calling it the Phoney War. So on the 9th of April 1940, the quiet break of the war came to an end as Germany invaded Denmark and Norway, meeting very little resistance. From here they were able to launch Case Yellow, an offensive plan to attack France. On the 10th of May 1940, Nazi Germany invaded Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands. The main reason for this invasion was to be able to enter France whilst avoiding the defences they had prepared. The Allies were not ready to defend against a northern attack. The French and British allies, along with other European armies, were quickly overpowered by what at the time felt like a completely unstoppable Germany with the use of their Blitzkrieg Tactics. Blitzkrieg was a fast, coordinated, highly mobile attack that combined air attacks with ground troops along a narrow front line, which was developed in order to prevent any stalemate battles that happened often during the trench warfare of World War I. They truly seemed unstoppable. Starting on May 26, 1940, in an attempt to escape the complete slaughter of their troops, 338,000 of the Allied men were evacuated from the coast of France to Great Britain as a part of Operation Dynamo, also known as the Miracle of Dunkirk. On the 22nd of June 1940, France officially surrendered, meaning it had taken Germany less than 3 months to conquer most of Western Europe. With France defeated, Hitler turned his sights to Britain. His plan was to bomb it and weaken its defence and morale before invading with a ground force. These air attacks began the Battle of Britain on the 10th of July 1940, but the British, who were motivated by the morale-building speeches of newly appointed Prime Minister Winston Churchill, successfully managed to counter the German air attacks. Frustrated with this, Hitler ordered the bombings of not just the Royal Air Force bases, but civilian targets as well, including largely populated areas. These attacks usually happened at night and were referred to as the Blitz. The Blitz brought the British people together and strengthened their resolve. It continued well into 1941. So for now, the British had seemed to put a stop to the seemingly unstoppable German attacks, but without some kind of help would not be able to hold them off for long. The British decided to ask US President Franklin D. Roosevelt for help. Although the Americans refused to get fully involved with the war initially, they agreed to send weapons, ammunition, artillery, and other much-needed supplies to Britain. However, on the 27th of September 1940, Germany also received help. They signed a treaty with Italy and Japan, joining the 3 countries into the Axis powers. While the British were preparing for a full invasion, Hitler began to look east. Despite signing the Nazi-Soviet pact with Soviet leader Joseph Stalin, Hitler had always intended to invade the Soviet Union to gain living room for the German people. This decision to open up a second front to the war is considered by many to be one of Hitler's worst, arguably stretching the Nazi force too thin. On the 22nd of June 1941, the German army officially invaded the Soviet Union. They were taken by surprise, and the Nazis were able to advance quickly. However, the Germans had underestimated the vastness of the Soviet land and its winters. Cold and wet, the German soldiers could barely move their tanks through the snow and the mud. The invasion was stalled. It was around this time that the Nazis started killing large groups of Jews, shooting them and dumping them into pits. This soon evolved into gas chambers, but eventually deemed to be a method of death that was too slow, they built death camps such as Auschwitz, created to kill thousands of people a day, in a far more efficient form of massacre. They had created an entire elaborate plan to eradicate Europe of Jews, now known as the Holocaust. They also targeted gypsies, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, the disabled, and all Slavic people for slaughter. And by the end of the war, the Nazis had killed 11 million people, based purely on their racial policies. So Germany was not the only country looking to expand. Japan was also poised for invasion, hoping to take over vast areas in Southeast Asia. However, they were concerned that the US may try to stop them, so on December 7th, 1941, they sent planes to wreak havoc on the US naval base Pearl Harbor. It took just 2 hours to sink 21 US ships. Shocked and angry at this unprovoked attack, the United States declared war on Japan the following day, and 3 days after that, they officially declared war on Germany as well. The US retaliated against Japan by bombing Tokyo, Yokohama, and Nagoya. Although the damage was fairly light, it caught the Japanese off guard, although the Japanese were dominating the Pacific War at this time. Similar to how the Germans initially felt unstoppable, the Japanese were winning battle after battle in the early part of the Pacific War. They successfully took the Philippines, Wake Island, Guam, the Dutch East Indies, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Burma. But there was a huge turning point in this war during the Battle of Midway. This was supposed to be a secret Japanese attack on the US airbase Midway, which would likely have ended in a decisive victory for Japan. However, what they didn't know was that the US had successfully broken several Japanese codes. Learning ahead of time about the planned attack, an ambush was prepared. The Japanese lost the battle, losing 4 aircraft carriers and many of their pilots. No longer did they have naval superiority in the Pacific. So over in Eastern Europe, the Battle of Stalingrad, which started on the 17th of July 1942 and ended on the 2nd of February 1943, had completely changed the tide of war. After the Germans were defeated in the battle, they were on the defensive for the first time, being pushed back towards Germany by the Soviet army. With the Nazis being pushed back in the east, it was time for the British and US forces to attack the west. In a plan that took almost a year to organise, the Allied forces launched a surprise attack on the beaches of Normandy in northern France on the 6th of June 1944. The first day of the battle, known as D-Day, was crucial. If the Allies could not break the German defences on the first day, then they would have time to bring in reinforcements, which would render the invasion a complete failure. Despite many losses and an extremely bloody fight on the beach codenamed Omaha, the Allies did manage to break through on the first day. With the beaches secured, Allies were able to safely bring in more troops and supplies to prepare for a major offensive. As the Germans were beginning to retreat, many top German officials wanted Hitler killed to put an end to the war. They made an assassination attempt on the 20th of July 1944, but the bomb only injured Hitler. Those involved in the attempt were quickly rounded up and killed. Hitler was still refusing to accept any form of defeat. In one last offensive, using Blitzkrieg Tactics, the Germans pushed through the Ardennes forest in Belgium in December 1944, and despite this being one of the bloodiest battles ever fought by US troops, the Allies ultimately had victory. Wanting to end the war as soon as possible, the Allies decided to bomb any remaining factories or oil depots left in Germany, and by the spring of 1945, the Germans had been pushed back inside of their own borders. After 6 years of fighting, they were low on fuel, food, ammunition, and even troops. The majority of those left to fight were those that were too young, too old, or too wounded. On April 25, 1945, the Soviet army had Berlin, Germany's capital, completely surrounded. Finally accepting that the war was lost, Hitler committed suicide on the 30th of April 1945. But despite victory in Europe, the war was not completely over, as Japan was still fighting. The death toll for the Pacific was extremely high, especially due to the fact that the Japanese culture forbade surrender. The US were very concerned about how many of their soldiers would die if they invaded Japan. So President Harry Truman, who had become president after Roosevelt died on the 12th of April, only a month before the end of World War II in Europe, had a huge decision to make. Do they use their new, deadly weapon against Japan in hopes that it would force a surrender without the need to invade? Truman decided to attempt to save US lives. On August 6, 1945, the US dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and 3 days later dropped another one on Nagasaki. The devastation was unbelievable, and Japan ultimately surrendered on the 16th of August 1945. After the war was over, the world was a different place. It had taken somewhere between 40 and 70 million lives, and destroyed a huge part of Europe. It also established two large superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Although they had worked together to defeat Nazi Germany, they became enemies. Hoping to prevent another major war from happening, representatives from 50 countries met in San Francisco and founded the United Nations on October 24, 1945. So that was our simplified timeline of World War II. Really hope you guys enjoyed it and it helped you understand the war a little better. If you have any other suggestions for wars or periods in history that you would like to see made simple, let us know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time on History Unlocked.